Hello, everyone. My name is Hedvig Kjellström. I'm a professor. Yeah, you introduced me. So I'm from KTH, and I'm excited to be here. I think this is a really fantastic series. So I will watch the last week's lecture on YouTube. That sounds very relevant for what I'm going to talk about. So I would like to talk about my thoughts around how we survive and navigate in a time of rapid changes, both technological and social. We have had some really groundbreaking changes before in our history. So usually you divide our technological development into 3 revolutions. The first revolution being that we found out how to stay in a place for a long time and grow crops and raise livestock and so on, moving from being hunter-gatherers, and then we could be many more people on Earth. And after that, several major inventions were, of course, made, like the wheel and discovery how to process metal and so on. But it was not until very recently that the next big transformation happened with the Industrial Revolution. So you usually say that this is as transforming as when we found out how to grow our own crops. So it was the transition to new manufacturing processes, especially it started out in the textile industry, where you went from manual, like crafts production of textile into industrial production of textile. And it was different in different countries, but it roughly went on from 1760 to 1840 or 50. And now we're actually seeing the third revolution, as big as the Industrial Revolution, which is usually called the Digital Revolution. So what is happening now since the 60s is that we're moving from analog technology into digital, into the world of computers and data. And this is at least as large a revolution as the 2 previous ones. And this is happening very, very close to the second revolution. So it's like a very rapid growth in speed. So we can just wait for the next revolution. We don't know what that is. But before we go on, I would like to define what I mean with AI, because a lot of people, it has become very fashionable, and it's used in many different ways. But what I mean with the AI is a system that is encapsulated into an embodiment, and it doesn't need to be a physical embodiment, but it's encapsulated in the sense that it takes in information, and then without sort of communicating with a human, it reasons about that information, makes decisions and plans and judgments, and then acts upon these decisions. So regular digital technology, or digital technology in the broad sense, is not AI. It's so what has transformed our lives is that we can make machines that process data much more efficiently than before, and we can provide databases and search the internet for information. And this is part of the Industrial Revolution. It's like 20 years ago, when you booked travel, you went to a travel agency, and there was a person there who was specialized in contacting all different air carriers and find the cheapest tickets and so on. But now you just do a few clicks on ticket and book your own travel. So this is a huge revolution, but it's not AI. So what AI is are typically autonomous cars, interfaces like Iris or Alexa, which can talk to and that can help you do things. They are sort of agents that are subjects in some sense that can make their own decisions. And I think we will touch upon that in the discussion later. But this is, and I think that AI is what is fundamentally novel right now, and that is changing our lives in the most, the most right now. So I talked about accelerating changes. So there are some extremely rapid changes going on. Some are, sort of interesting. I mean, the volume of data that we have access to is growing exponentially all the time. And this is what drives this AI revolution. And then there are some worrying changes that happen very rapidly, such as climate changes. But there are also some very positive changes, such as the death rate of mothers and babies is like dropping to a fraction of what it was just 50 years ago. So that's fantastic. And I really recommend, if you haven't yet, I really recommend a visit to Gapminder to find out about changes. But what I want to convey is that things are happening at an accelerating pace, much faster than any time in the history of mankind. So, will robots take our jobs? That's the most common scenario or the most common question to me as an AI or robotics researcher is, so will robots take our jobs? So scenario is that they will do all the jobs so we can stop working and just enjoy our hobbies. So let's assume that we can. So as a computer scientist, given what I know about the difficulties of developing robots and AI, I think it's a very far scenario that robots will be so competent so that they can do all our jobs. But let's imagine that. Then we need to. We can probably work out a societal and economical system building on the premise that robots produce all the value, and then we share it among humans according to some people propose basic universal income, for example. But I don't think that is actually the core of the problem. I don't think that the political priorities should be the focus of discussion. I think we should take one step back. So imagine that we have a world where no human has to produce anything. It will be like the late Roman Empire that it's to me it's sort of very decadent that you can just relax and don't do anything. And the question is what makes people happy? Would we be happy if we didn't accomplish anything, sort of? Or if we don't feel needed, and if we don't solve problems and encounter difficulties and overcome them. But I think that is much more your subject, so I will leave that over to you. But I still think I don't think it's like a paradise. I rather see it the other way around. I at least enjoy my work very much. But I don't think that this will happen, actually, because so in the last industrial revolution, people were extremely worried. Many people were protesting hard against the Industrial Revolution. So workers sabotaged textile machines by throwing in their wooden shoes, their sabots. And in a sense, they were right, because like their role in the production process changed enormously from being skilled craftsmen to only being workers, and someone else owned the means of the production and so on. And we'll come back to that later. But the fact is that they're worried that they would lose their job, that it would be like human tailors would not be needed anymore, was false, because there were a lot of new jobs created from the last Industrial Revolution. And so we have a bit the same situation now, that many people are not protesting, but are very worried about the development of AI, because they fear that AI will that human jobs will disappear. But I think that there will be a lot of new jobs. Like, who knew what an influencer was 3 years ago? I don't really know what an influencer is today, but for sure there are new kinds of jobs created all the time in an accelerating pace. However, the people worrying about the Industrial Revolution had a point. So in the wake of the last technical revolution, there were huge changes, not only in how value was created, like who owned the production means and got the value, but also in how society worked. So society was fundamentally changed by the technological change. Sorry. So, so the reactions to the Industrial Revolution was totalitarian systems developed, totalitarian ideologies developed, but also democracy. So, so society changed completely. And things are happening now as well. So, so what we see today, like in the post-truth society, I think that this is very much an effect of the digital revolution. So, for example, opinion corridors. For example, on Facebook, your flow is heavily curated by Facebook in order to give you things that sort of stimulates you the most and keep you on Facebook. So this has the effect that people's different, the information flow of different people are very different. So it's not only that people have different opinions about how to solve the state of the world, they also have very different views of what actually is the state of the world. They get access to totally different world views. And this is, the reason for this is not that some evil person at Facebook has sort of made this happen. It's an emergent behavior that comes from this totally undistributed algorithm that just that involves some aspects of AI. It sort of makes decisions that affect your flow. That has this effect. But it's also, so I would like to mention positive things, that nowadays it's much easier to become heard. Yesterday I spoke at a similar venue, but at a music conference, and there a lot of people talked about the music, it's the hurdle to produce your own music is much, much lower, and the hurdle to produce your own journalism is much, much lower. So I think this could be very good for stronger democratic development as well. And so the question is, what will happen next? I don't know, but I must say, so what worries me is that the development is so fast and it's just getting faster and faster, so it's impossible to foresee what will happen. But I'm really an optimist, so I think that people in general are more good and empathic than evil and greedy. I think there are a lot more genuinely empathic people in the world than evil and greedy. So that's so I think we're, as a community, we are robust in this sense. Just to end on a positive note. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation, Susanne. I'm very happy and pleased to be here and discuss this very, very important and fascinating stuff. I'm an ethicist and a theologian, so I don't know anything about the machines. I just see a lot of film and I take part of mass media, of course, the comments about the debates about this area. So I guess my perspective is not so much to say what AI is actually about as the possibilities of the development and so on, but more like what are the perspectives that we as citizens, as humans, interact with the information we get and the imaginations of how we relate to this concept of this AI thing that is being presented. I am, together with a colleague, we have just started a small network with theologians and philosophers that we call techno-theology or techno-theology. So we will try to interact theological perspectives with AI and life with machines. So we'll see where that goes. We will have the first workshop this January. But it is, of course, hard to say what the future will bring us. When it comes to inventiveness, human abilities are amazing. But ethics and morality does not seem to develop at the same rate as technology. We are more or less accustomed to that man can travel in space. It is still incredible that it is possible. It really changed the perspective of who we are in this universe. I thought about that when I saw First Man 2 weeks ago. Have you seen it? The First Man? Oh, you should. It's a good film. I saw it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's about the first successful journey to the moon. And today, 50 years later, we are on the verge of a giant step, as you, Hedvig, have told us about, the digitalisation and the AI revolution and the robot community. The researchers say it's a long time before the robot can be mistaken for a human being, but at the same time we become increasingly dependent on robots in working life, at home, and soon with autonomous cars. Are we ready for this? Are we ready for the fridges able to control what we eat, if we eat healthy or not, according to interests from medicine, doctors, or governmental climate control authorities? Are we ready for surveillance of our data on behavior, health, economy, criminal record, and machines coordinated with social credit systems like the ones China have introduced. In the spring, I just had my last book that is called Surveilled, or it's in Swedish, so it's called Övervakad. And you have it here in your library. So this is Magnus has it now. So, here I develop more about life in the surveillance society and life with machines. In this is a kind of essayistic book. But are we meeting a future where robots and humans will interact more and more until it's so hard to make a difference? Will we in the future think of humans as machines or of the machines as humans? Will the distinction be relevant at all? The question is not new. Already in 1751, the philosopher Julien Offray de la Métrie wrote the thesis Man, a Machine. From that point of view, the difference between human and robot is only a matter of abilities and skills. Man has no soul and therefore no conscience either, he claimed. In our time, the questions have been raised by a few theologians, but the more sci-fi writers and philosophers. It has given rise to beliefs about transhumanism, cyborgs, and hybrids between machines and humans. In these underground movements, existential questions about meaning and identity have always been relevant. In the AI and robot society, human beings are interchangeable, especially in relation to work. It does not have to be negative. It doesn't have to be negative because there are tasks that nobody wants to do if it's able to choose. At the same time, new commitments will be made that require great expertise. As you, Hedvig, brought up. New jobs will arise and come. So this includes far from everyone. We have built up a large part of the customs and ideologies about work. The robot community challenges that idea. Everyone cannot manufacture robots. Some robots manufacture themselves. But everyone lives with robots on an increasing scope. What does it mean morally? Who is responsible for the robot's actions when, for example, accidents occur? Is it the manufacturer of the software, the owner, or the user? In an already classical dilemma today is how one should program self-driving cars. If the majority of the people could choose between different categories to be sacrificed in an inevitable accident, people will make different choices according to preferences of, for example, human values, value or racial structure, or who should be saved and who should be killed. So these are kind of moral dilemmas that are introduced into this discussion with the AI and self-driving cars. And I know Hedvig has some arguments there. Maybe we can come back to that discussion later about responsibilities and possibilities. And these issues concern morality, but also human rights perspectives. The ontological question is, of course, if only humans should have human rights. What about animals and models of AI robots that have the same kind of capabilities and need for protection as humans? I will not go deeper into that question right now, but instead raise some issues in relation to humans and artificial intelligence. As I understand it, algorithms can do anything that can be coded as long as they have access to data they need at the required speed and are put into a design frame that allows for execution of the tasks thus determined. In all these domains, progress has been enormous. The effectiveness of algorithms is increasingly enhanced through big data, availability of an enormous amount of data on all human activity and other processes in the world, which allow a particular type of AI known as machine learning to draw inference about what happens next by detecting patterns. Algorithms do better than humans wherever tested, even though humans' biases are perpetuated in them. Any system designed by humans reflects human bias, and algorithms rely on that data capturing the past, thus automizing the status quo if we fail to prevent them. Towards this background, one can ask, and I will just say that Hedvig here recently presented this differentiation between the AI, what is AI and what is AI not, so the digital system is not AI, but the argument I will raise here is that maybe it's a question mark after that. Will we in the future see a bigger interference or a deeper interaction between digitalization and AI? And maybe we can also bring that question into the later discussion, because it has influences about, for example, surveillance society system and how government or commercial companies and so on uses this kind of data into and use the machines as a kind of steering of people's minds, behavior, etc. So towards this background, one can ask if there is still a space of privacy, freedom and speech, and even freedom of thought. The traces we leave behind are analyzed as economical, ideological, and religious structures that can be used to steer our behavior. This is already a reality in China, where Skynet is a part of a surveillance system which grows as we speak. A social credit system that rewards the loyal citizens and punishes dissidents. A system that is built as a network between authorities such as banks, police, hospitals, and, for example, travel agencies. A person who criticizes the Communist Party will be an outlaw, secluded from important parts of society. The same will happen to his or her family and friends who does not distract from the person in question. The 3,000-year-old image of God as inescapable and all-seeing comes to mind. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. This image of God is in this passage reminds us that data could be used to design a system that is better than humans. Repeatedly, humans have shown incapable to distinguish war, violence, injustices, racism, and sexism. Humans are capable to realize Holocaust and several genocides even after the universal promise never again. So why shouldn't humans open for the possibility to create a human 2.0? A better version of what we are today? This made me think about the writer Isaac Asimov, who wrote 3 Laws of Robotics in a novel from 1942 called Runaround. And in the first point, he says that a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. And 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by humans being except beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such its protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So this logic was applied in the Terminator films, as you record and remember, of course, at least for the main Terminator played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who sacrificed himself for the cause of human existence. The other machines had programmed themselves from an original version of destruction used in military warfare. It threatened to kill the last survivors of humankind. Schwarzenegger was a kind of Christ-like profile who died in the first film but resurrected in the second and third. The possibility for resurrection is not a common human capability, but for a machine it is nothing special. In the first season, for example, in the TV series Westworld, the human-like AI robots' memories are erased and bodies newborn repeatedly. They are slaves at the consumer's market for entertainment, to be oppressed, violated, or to fall in love with. Asimov's proposal for 3 laws of robotics may be ethically trustworthy, but do we really trust private companies and military research to develop these robots and programs, as are the circumstances today? How do these companies and interests relate to principles about justice, peace, empathy, non-racial structures, or environmental concerns? These questions also contain underlying dimensions close to theology. What is a human being actually? How does she distinguish herself from a robot? In Terminator, the Alien movies, and Westworld, the cyborg or the AI robot are machines that are predetermined to act in specific ways. It turns out that they eventually become self-programming, or that the software has a possibility to free will. The robot's choice becomes an endless series of options that becomes unpredictable and uncontrollable. Man has created an image, an imago homo, which brings out the best and worst in us. When de la Mettrie claimed that human has no soul, that she is a machine, he claimed this from empirical data on how the body reacts spontaneously to different things without controlling it, such as the skin nodding when we freeze. But we can turn these perspectives around and ask instead if the robot can become like a human being. In a moral sense, maybe even better than a human being. If you theologically or philosophically claim that man is the image of God, can you then see the robot as the image of man, as imago homo? Does this mean that people should relate to the robot as to a fellow human? It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. The dystopias about how human makes robots for slaves is countless. It is a relevant ethical question what we do with the machines because they reflect who we are. They make us morally better or worse when they attract our innermost requests and dreams of who we want to be. In the best, in my taste, cyborg movie Blade Runner, the replicant Roy Batty confronts his maker and struggles with the burnt-out cop Rick Deckard. The replicant wants eternal life, but loses the battle. In the end of his life, he delivers a speech with deep existential value. Can robots become poets? I will close this presentation with his word and ask if it would be possible. Would we like the robots to be able to make such reflections as this? I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. attack ships on fire of the shoulder of Orion. I watch sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain, time to die. Thank you.
So, once again, thank you both. Incredibly interesting presentations. And since I am the moderator, I will give myself liberty to ask you the first question, and then I will give it out to you. But I have a lot of questions, so if we run out of them, you can get back to me. So I think maybe one of the first questions people would ask about those systems that we talk about today is, and you touched upon those questions already, what forces are forming a system? What are the strongest forces to form a system? And if we say we can say now we have the power of algorithms, as you described. What is forming those algorithms? Is it by chance, or what are the political motivations behind them? So you mentioned, for instance, Hedvig, that in the social media we tended to have feedback on our own beliefs all the time. People are scratching our back in a way that the like we got is because we have peers around us that like our ideas. And the algorithms form a system that we are always having that kind of feedback. Not always, but that is a dominant feedback. So we have a person here who is becoming like an old school politicians in a way. Because that is a system with the old school politicians, that politicians would disregard things that don't support their own argument, right? But we didn't expect all of us to be small politicians, right? But that is what the social media make us. Something that is supporting our own worldview is always the strongest factor. Is that, for instance, that is one example of a system that we built and we are taking part of gladly. Where is that agency here? There are several things that I will present, and then please. So if you were a Marxist, for instance, you would say, well, that is the capitalist logic to create that kind of consumer. There must be a logic from the capitalist point of view. So that is the evil system running this, consumer-based. There's a consumer-based logic here. If you would look at another system, as Susanne points to, communist China, we have a totalitarian system that creates surveillance, machinery of surveillance. So we have two different sort of motivations for. So my question would be then, maybe you don't believe in the big spider in the net, perhaps, but what are the strongest forces? It's a tricky question, but you could say something about it in forming these technological systems from your point of view.
So first of all, I would like to say, so I think definitely that this Skynet, it's AI, because it's it encapsulates a lot of knowledge that it sort of, it makes a lot of judgments on its own.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to put it. I'm not sure. I think it's a question of power, that having access to data is very empowering, and that people in general are not aware of the power that you can potentially get over them by getting access to their data. So I think the big problem so it's a different thing with Skynet and in China. But in general, people are gladly sharing a lot of very intimate data about themselves that can empower others, because others might have algorithms to fuse information from different sources. And I think that's what is sort of scary. So one thing, so Facebook, I think it's actually very harmless, sort of what Facebook is doing. They are creating a social platform where you can meet others, and they use information from you to curate your flow and to curate sort of the contact network. But there are, I mean, insurance companies can compute with very high precision exactly what is the risk that each person will be subject to different crimes, for example. And I think that's, I think it's a bit scary that there is so much information floating around. So I'm not sure if it's a question of capitalism or Marxism. It's rather that it's a totally new power structure that we can't sort of overview. We don't understand what could be the effects.
That we act innocently and without any attempts of being precautious and understanding.
Yeah, but I don't think it's enough to be precautious. I mean, we can't fend off this. We give out information all the time. So why the Chinese government can like survey all their people is because people have developed really nice facial recognition algorithms, and I'm one of one of the guilty people. So I think a lot of people have contributed to these kind of new power structures without knowing and without.
In an organic way, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would really agree with you on what you're saying, that we are feeding the kind of new body that we don't know the contours of. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of growing thing. I see a lot of horror movies. I just think about this all the time. But you see, it's a kind of feeding that we voluntarily do, that we participate, and also, in fact, Skynet is also a voluntary action because they have a very clever system of social credit system. So when you, for example, go in the grocery shop and you buy some vegetables, you get points, plus points in your credit social system. But if you buy, for example, cigarettes or alcohol, you will get minus points. So, and if you are like a political dissident, you criticize the government or make critical remarks on anything, you can actually risk to be an outlaw. And that has happened to several journalists who cannot buy a train ticket because they don't have access no longer to the bank account. But those people who are loyal to the system, of course, feed the system with the information, so that it's not that people feel it's something actually wrong with it, because it gives you credit and it gives your children a good chances to good schools and to have a bank loans and so on for so it's and I think it's like a picture, imagination of something that is created that we don't really know the face, so we don't really know what the consequences will be. But I think the forces for the system to become, we are creating beings, like we want to produce, we want to create things, we have imagination, we have desires, we feel fear, so we want to protect ourselves, so we create systems to protect ourselves from fear, from what we are scared of. We have desires that we can have special machines for our sex orgies, or like these sex robots that had been discussed, and we have like it's we are driven by old classical feelings that human beings always have had: curiosity, fear, desires, and so on. And we are, and it's. I think that is. It's hard to see how we really can control. We think we can control the systems, but I don't really see how we actually can do that. Who has the control of the information? I don't have the control of the information about me.
No.
Because that is third, fourth, fifth part, and that is what I mean with this growing body, that we don't see the contours of.
Yeah, thank you. Someone want to comment directly on this idea or this question about the forces behind the power of algorithms? You're welcome to say something. Otherwise, I have, yeah.
Just a comment. Is it because of digital revolution, or what you will call it, that people are much more far away from, for instance, democracy? Yesterday there was an article in Dagens Nyheter, or 2 days ago, about that it's just 2% in Sweden today that belongs to a political party. So it's very few people who really discuss the future from a political point of view. And today I went to a lecture before I came here, and the discussions was about development in cities. And suddenly somebody said, yes, if you want to build a high building in Tensta, it's very positive because you can get the plans through very fast, because people are happy about something happening in Tensta and they feel involved. But if you want to build a high building in Södermalm in Stockholm, it takes at least 6 years to get the plans through. And I think this has something to do with what's happening now with this development, with digital development. It has perhaps not so much to do with AI as it has to do with what has happened recently. That was just a comment.
Thank you. So the other question I want to bring is the question about the public self and the private self. And Susanne, you discussed this in your book in a very interesting way. For instance, if you think about the time when the Almighty God is the one who always scrutinizes not only our actions, actually, but also our thoughts. Mm-hmm. There is no border between the public self and the private self in a way, because you're always seen through and scrutinized by this higher power. And it's a horrible, as you write in your book, for Augustinus, that was a terror. I mean, it was horrible to feel this eye on himself, to the point when he was embracing that situation, and that was a revelation for him. So he totally embraced that idea of sharing everything and be transparent to the bone and to the thoughts and to the soul. Then people would say maybe that, well, it's not so much to argue about these new systems of surveillance, because they've always been there. And before they were voluntary, as in the case of the religious person, at least the mental idea of surveillance was not a problem in that sense. And in the local society, as a small village, for instance, even in today, you would say this is the strongest surveillance system we have, the social control of the small unit of local people, as well as in a strong family culture. For instance, the clan, who every person's action is controlled in a sense. So what you describe with this new technology and the new systems perhaps are due to urbanization, globalization, and streams of people that are not controlled in that try to be anonymous. But are they still, aren't still the strongest control in the small local society?
Well, I would say maybe there are different levels, but maybe we are experience it more concrete in a social environment where we know the people and we have our reputation to think about, and people are gossiping and so on, and this kind of surveillance or friends and enemies in your close surrounding. So that is, of course, a kind of surveillance that is touchable. But in a more abstract way, the surveillance that is collecting the data of my traces of what I buy when I go to the grocery store, about my health profile, about my watch that what do you call it? Like you. When you're out running,
The
take the
Apple
time.
Watch.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Apple Watch.
Yeah.
You can connect it to the sleeping hours, and who has the interest of this information? Why do I get this advertised about? This vitamin pills. You should take these ones. Who has sent this to me? And it's like it's this kind of anonymous surveillance eye. That
Exactly.
is not, and it's very abstract. And who am I talking to, and who is really steering my actions? Is it I who make my choices myself, or is it some commercial interest out there that is steering what I do when I go to the grocery shop? So it's kind in the end, it becomes a question about an existential question about the free will and my responsibility as a person and my way of thinking, and why am I acting this way? Am I programmed?
Yeah.
But my question, maybe, there's this undercurrent question perhaps that implies that, and people sometimes argue like that, well, this is a reinstallation and reinventing of that lost, control and safety within our previous life. And even in the religious sense, the loss of this transparency we had in front of God. So now, consciously or unconsciously, we are reinstalling these systems that's sort of mimicking the old control and so on.
Yes.
But it's a very speculative idea of thinking, of course.
Yeah.
But I think the really problematic aspect is, as you said, that we lose control because it's not possible for a single person to have an overview of the power, sort of who is making decisions. You don't even know where decisions come from. That you get an advertisement for. That really scares the shit out of me. When I have been so. Last week I was talking to my husband about a restaurant, and then it was very weird. And then he Googled for it, so he wrote Sankt Eriksgatan, and he got the name of that restaurant. So that and I had my phone on, so I wonder how his map, sort of Google map, found out.
That becomes like a transformation of you becoming a machine, or you are the part of the machine.
Yeah,
because
or
that
at least
example will show that the system will guide you what to do. It's not you who uses the system; it's the system who uses you.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
Or someone is, as I said before, I don't, very often it's not like a person control or a company or a state in control. It's just emergent behavior. And I think that's kind of disturbing that things happen without anyone making decisions.
I guess in the, yes.
Will try to speak English. Quite hard for me, but last year I went to this conference at Bonnier Konsthall about the image of war, and it was really interesting because Amnesty were telling everyone there that they have a problem with the algorithm of YouTube, because earlier YouTube has their rules about showing dead people and hard pictures. From the beginning, people were actually, when they report hardcore movies about dead victims and dead bodies, actually it was people working for YouTube picking out all these movies. And they could send it to Amnesty because it was a very important witnesses about the war. It was proof which Amnesty could use later on after the war was over. And nowadays, it's algorithm at YouTube, which
sorts away.
yeah, and they pick out they delete all these war movies, and now Amnesty has they are in a they have lost a lot of very important evidence. Yeah, exactly, about the war, because it's algorithm. It's nobody up there who has seen it. It has just been deleted. So I think that was very, very interesting. And thank you. That was my.
You want to comment on that, Hedvig?
No, I think it's, and there are a lot of examples. I mean, probably it's because there is simply too much work to go through manually. And there are many examples. So Amazon recently, so they tried out having like people applying for jobs at Amazon. They had a pre-sorting of the CVs into like potentially interesting and not interesting, and that algorithm, they closed it down because it had biases in it, and the biases comes from the data that probably, I don't know since I haven't seen the algorithm, but probably the algorithm had seen a lot more CVs from men than from women, and so it knew much more about men and like what a good male CV looks like and a bad male CV. And it probably also, there were a lot of causal dependencies between what hurdle was it for a man to send in their CV to Amazon and dare to apply for a job there versus a woman. So you don't know how good the women and the men were on average. So there were a lot of biases in the data. And the algorithm just blindly learned those biases and made decisions based upon that. So it was biased against women, against non-Caucasians and so on. So they closed it down. So this is algorithms are less competent than people. But yeah.
This Monday I went to Arts and Crafts and was listening to Jonna Bornemark, and she was talking about this intellectus and ratio as philosophic terms of that algorithms and computers can be ratio. They can only be like logarithm and smart as digital systems can't be what human beings are. You can actually point out what you don't know. And I think it's interesting. We are at Konstfack in a art space, in a creative, in a place, in a room for creativity, and I want you to point out what artificial intelligence could do with a creativity in this high academic art space.
Yeah,
I
that's a good
can
question.
answer, but maybe you want to like. I can answer first. So I actually discussed this yesterday at this music conference, and there was a really heated, animated discussion about this. So it was a musician who was really angry, like, who said that machines can't be creative and you're destroying the. I think that humans are incredibly much better at empathy, creativity, and so on than AI. But I don't see any principal reason why a machine cannot be creative. I mean, it goes over to your domain more, but it's not clear what is the difference between an artificial intelligence and a natural intelligence. So we don't really know. And I don't see any sort of reason why an artificial intelligence could not be more intelligent than a person. There is a lot of people thinking about this. For example, Nick Bostrom in Oxford. So you can watch TED Talks with him. He talks a lot about. So it's called a singularity. So when you reach the point at which artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent than humans and start inventing new artificial intelligence potentially, or decide to get rid of all humans because they destroy the climate or something like that. Yeah, it's very, very far-fetched, and I think it's very far away, but I don't see any principal reason why a machine cannot be. So creativity, we don't really know what it is, but it's also you come up with something that is really, really new and also has value.
I think also maybe if we make a distinction between, are we really discussing the result of the mechanism of that becomes art? This is this painting, this piece of music, this and that. Then is there a difference between what the machine creates, so to speak, or the human being creates? We look at the result and say, oh, this is art and this is not art. And the other part of the discussion is the ontological question of where does the creation comes from, or where does the music come from, like Ingmar Bergman's question. That is the really who has, if we are talking about capacity, of course, robots also could have the capacity to do something that is similar to what persons do when they do create something. If they have a program that can create, and also like
they could appear to have feelings and
yeah.
But I'm sorry, I have to beg to differ here.
Yeah.
But I would say that when we speak about art, maybe we need to keep in mind that art is not a picture or a piece of music, because what computers can do, of course, is to mimic. They can learn. This is what a painting looks like. Over and over again, you can download paintings, and something will come out that looks like art. But I would say here, we would say that is not art.
So it's the process of creating art.
But there's also a big difference because if you look at Techne, for instance, and forensics, is the timing and the ethics that lays behind every piece of art needs also to be taken into account before we could name something art. And now I'm being very kind of maybe blunt here and picky, but you know, being in charge of an art school, I think this is important to keep in mind so we know what we're talking about. And I think ethics is definitely part of art, always needs to be. So it's I think that is why it's very interesting that your question needs to be addressed, especially in an art school, that you know, computers may do something that looks like art, but is it art?
I just have to, I'm thinking about an artwork by Ai Weiwei, who it was several years ago. I wrote about it in my book because he had this. He was so clever and it was so funny because the Chinese government was surveilling him, of course, because he was a political dissident and he criticized the Chinese structure and government and so on. And so they surveilled him all the time where he went and all his friends and everything. But what he did was that he as a kind of art work of his life, he installed surveillance cameras in his own home and surveilled himself. So in every room he had the surveillance cameras where he slept, where he ate, so and this is also related to your question about transparency, because what he did was a piece of art that made himself transparent. But it was a paradox because what they actually did see was his body moving around, his body was eating, his body was sleeping, but they couldn't really surveil his thoughts, everything that was invisible about Ai Weiwei, and that was really him. That was not possible to surveil through the surveillance cameras. And this making of himself in relation to the machines in this particular situation became the piece artwork, and that was of course like so I just reflected on what you just said. So it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Could I just so I would like to point out that I'm not claiming that. So I haven't actually. I didn't say that robots or that AI can or cannot do art, because that's a totally different discussion. But creativity is a wider concept, I think. Let me say it like this. So I think it's a question of, I think art involves feelings, what you feel inside. And I don't think that you can create an artificial intelligence that feels. I don't even know what that would mean. But you can only, you can create an agent that acts as if they have feelings and that understands how humans react, so it can interpret human signals, so it can react to other humans' display of feelings as if it had feelings. But I don't think that that means that it has feelings. So, yeah.
I would like to say something about this art notion. When the industrial, I mean, the art, the concept of art is kind of new, a couple of 100 years old, right, professors? And I'm thinking about the Posttruth vision. Let's say that algorithms have already won. What is a human being when the world is ruled by algorithms and big data that is floating around?
He's very
and also I'm wondering then, if when we say art is a human, we have a very human-centered definition on what art is. So what should an artist do and a human being do in a future that is ruled by big data? what is our role, and is it interesting to define what art is from our perspective when there is a revolution going on with a new way of constructing the world with this big flow of data. It's some sort of a question, but I don't know, but that's my confused thoughts right now.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that question, maybe, but I'm also quite interested in another terminology, which is augmented intelligence. So we talk about AI and we can talk about IA. And for me, it's also quite interesting to think about, so this is a new technique, and as technique is getting more and more accessible and more and cheaper, we have seen that artists start to employ them for producing art. So we have photography, and now we have video art, and we have all these new kind of arts that was impossible without this technology. So I'm also quite interested in what can we as humans start to create in new art forms using this kind of technology, and not only looking at this as a threat, but as something that can make us produce even more or go a different way. And I think that is also an interesting question, and not focusing only on this dystopic view of technology.
So that is fantastic. That was exactly why this other AI guy was angry at me yesterday, because I said that I think it's much. So I'm not sure that robots should. Why should they start doing art, or what we define as art? Why? I mean, it's. Yeah, I think it's very much a human activity, and so I think it's very relevant to start. I would like to promote the concept of IA, augmented intelligence, to have a human in the loop, to sort of empower the human with new capabilities of doing cooler things. So I think that we should use, so humans are and will be for the foreseeable time much more capable of creating novel things. And machines are very good at learning patterns in large volumes of data, doing things very, very fast, doing the same thing very, very fast. So I'm not sure if it's even interesting to develop digital artists.
I think also maybe we, in a close future, maybe we will not look upon machines as something very apart from humans, that human and machines are more interacting. Like we already, we are peacemaker, what do you call it? Yeah. Pacemaker. Or you can be a peacemaker in war conflicts. Yeah. But pacemaker, you can have a pacemaker, and you have you of course you as a human you become friends or enemy with the machines. You can become a friend with your fridge at home, who will tell you what to eat. You don't have to think about that. So this interaction with the social interaction with machines is something very interesting that should be explored, I think. Who are we? As it's a kind of question I tried to tangle in my in the end of my in my presentation, that who do we become in the relation with machines, with our phones, with our data, computers, etc. So who are we? The product of the human from the reference of the machine.
We have some questions. I just want to make one comment around the relation to art, because even before the digital revolution, it was discussed, this question that we pose here, machines and art, and Ulf Linde, the famous theoretician of art theory, he had this discussion. He compared two works. One was by Jean Tinguely, who made drawing machines. So he made very clumsy machines, very mechanical, who produced drawings, abstract drawings. And then he compared those to Henri Michaud's drawing under influence of mescaline, under influence of drugs. He became almost like a machine, and he made these drawings. And he looked at those two works and said, well, they are very similar, actually. I cannot even distinguish them from each other by looking at them. So I have to go further. So he said, what I have to look for is not, what you mentioned, feelings, but he said intentions. So we have to address the artist's intentions. That was his conclusion. That was already in the 50s. So it's interesting today also. So please.
Well, one scaring thing about this meeting here is that we still have not touched the real main issue of what AI can make to us. And this is more important than anything else because it can enter with supercomputers, can enter our brain function. It can direct our behavior. And this was, in fact, the first issue of this technology, which was presented by the book Cybernetics 1948 of Professor Norbert Wiener. And it has been in debates for 50 years now. It has been published a lot of books about interaction between brains and supercomputers. And this has been an issue developed by the military research institutions. In Sweden, we have FOI, and they have a program. The main program is man-machine interaction, where they're talking about control our cognitive functions. And this was a declaration from the European Commission's Ethical Board 2005, where they made a strong warning about the direction of this technology and where it had coming so far.
Do you want to have a quick comment on that one? What was the actual question? Did you get it? Yes?
Well, it was not so much as a question as something I
As I interpret it, it's another lecture, but please, if you can answer, it's a big question.
I worked at FOI. I am not aware of this program. Sorry. So,
I think a lot of your question comes down to the fact that we don't know.
Yes, we do. We do. In fact, even if the political parties seem to be without interest, two former politicians, Hedvig and last year took this matter up. And made in Svenska Dagbladet in an article where he said we have gone far on the way to technocratic dictatorship.
I think Pontus Strimling, who had the first lecture, went into that question a bit. Yes.
Also, Hedvig
Yeah.
made a good explanation about this issue in his book of 2016, New Life, where he took up artificial intelligence from a broad perspective, but also from this brain interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind terribly if because I'm checking the watch, that's my role here, and totally selfishly, I would like you to instead of going into this topic, which is too
complicated to give a short answer to. But instead, could you just go back to what we talked about, Susanne? You know, there's a self-driving car that is in an accident. Yes. Who's responsible is it? Because I think the morality really comes into that question when there is a man-made machine intelligence. Who's responsible for it? Just as a kind of conclusion to this lecture.
Well, what I see is that it's a very complicated discussion about if you ask, for example, the insurance company, who will be chargeable towards the insurance company? Who is the? Do we? It is a question about will we own a car of our own in the next 20 years, or in 20 years, or will we have city cars that we just move into and pay a kind of rent, like there's bicycles we have during the summer? That is one question. Will we have another kind of ownership of these self-driving cars, and who is really responsible when it comes to things that the cars will do, like someone will get killed, or someone will do this and that, and or drive somewhere where you don't want to go? Can you control where the car actually drives, or can anyone take control of the car and drive you to somewhere? and this is as I understand it, it's a very big discussion about ethics and about responsibilities and owners. What do you call it? Egendoms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the difference, what is really novel about AI in relation to like computer systems in regular, is that they make decisions on their own. So it's really when an autonomous car runs into, I mean, whether it chooses to run into someone or the other, or if it does it at random, it still breaks Asimov's first law, that it actually hurts a person, and it's inevitable that a self-driving car sooner or later will hurt a person. And who is then responsible? Because if there was a driver driving, then that driver would of course be made responsible. But the self-driving car is driving on its own. So is the car developer responsible? No, I don't think so. That would be very strange. Or is the person sitting in the car at that time responsible? No, really, because it could be, as you say, like a taxi service. You just get into the car that happened to.
And who will have access? Because if we add to this discussion also this political dimension of there are political interests in particular individual, will everyone get access to the cars, or will the car will have a kind of morality that says, oh, you have drinking too much alcohol, you are in bad health, I drive you to the doctor, but I want to go to the library.
Hello.
No, or will there be like political dissidents will not be able to go anywhere because they are forbidden to use the system?
Who will control the car? And is the car a subject? Should the car be punished? Should the car go to prison, or should
bad car? Is that Fawlty Towers sketch? Have you seen that one?
No.
The bad car. John Cleese is punishing his car.
It seems as if the one question is leading to another, that is leading to another, that is leading to another. My final question is to you, before I leave the word to Magnus Bartos again. Do your competences, that is, there is technical developers of AI, and there are the philosophers and, taking care of questions about morality. Do they work together?
Not so much.
Not
No,
enough.
unfortunately not.
Maybe we will try to do some.
Yeah. So there is a problem solving those questions.
It's like in my introduction, I tried to say the techniques is faster to develop than the morality, and the ethics always comes in the second or third step. Not as a parallel to the developing systems. It always comes.
There is a lot of development around. So there's a new professor in ethics and AI at Umeå University, Victoria Dignam, who just started. And there is a research group at University College London who's working on fairness in AI and how you recognize these kind of biases that we talked about. How you make systems that are sort of resilient and sort of recognize these things. So I think there's an increasing interest, but I think it's lagging behind.
Yeah, I think you already asked the important question that I would think is, some kind of summarizing or where I also would end this discussion actually, and so this idea that technology is and has always been a double-edged sword. Face recognition technology can be used for as a repressive tool against dissidents. It can be used to, as the police are using that same technology to find pedophiles, to identify the faces in photos that are showing up on the internet, and they can finally find the perpetrators. So, in every technology, there are adaptations, and through the history, of course, and I also learned that to every technology there is a sexual adaptation. I don't know if that's true.
True.
But of course, the very question will. You posed that question already here. That who are forming, and that returns to my first question: what are the forces behind, and can we maybe create situations where we also take decisions with the competence from different, as the question was asked, are there groups of people discussing this from ethical, moral, and technological perspective together, for instance? And one would suggest even artistic, of course. So, yeah, I would like to say thank you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tack så mycket.